Today is Thursday, December 5th, 2024. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Supreme Court hears key arguments in the Tennessee ban on transgender surgeries for minors. We've got more on that and other stories coming up on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. We'd appreciate that. You can email us as well, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. We're here getting through the news of the cray, as we like to call it, each and every weekday, bright and early. Joining me today, CBN's Billy Hallowell and Trayvon Phillips. A lot to get to. On the focus story, we're taking a look. The persecution is continuing to rage in Iraq.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at what happens if you convert and what is the Christian population facing there today. So we'll be getting into all that today.
All right, and coming up on the main thing, voters in 7 out of 10 abortion-related initiatives back in November at the election across the U.S. decided to lift restrictions and enshrine abortion laws. And so we'll talk about that on the main thing with CBN's Paul Petit as far as what's next in the fight for life. All right. As always, make sure you are subscribed to all of the CBN News podcast, DC Debrief with John Stolnis, also Billy's Newsmakers podcast as well. All right, we're going to head now to the news in 90 seconds. And the New York Police Department is looking for help finding a gunman who allegedly shot and killed the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson early on Wednesday outside the Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Police described the attack as premeditated and pre-planned. Thompson was in town from Minnesota for United Healthcare's annual investors meeting, and he was staying across the street from the Hilton. Investigators say the suspect waited near the venue for several minutes before approaching Thompson from behind and firing multiple shots, hitting him in the back and calf. The suspect fled on foot, then on an e-bike, and was last seen in Central Park. The shooting occurred just blocks from Rockefeller Center Christmas tree lighting, drawing that thousands of tourists go to every year. Now there's a manhunt currently ongoing. And the Supreme Court appeared divided on Wednesday over state laws banning gender quote-unquote care for minors, hearing over 2 hours of intense arguments on Tennessee's law. The case hinges on whether the Equal Protection Clause prohibits states from restricting puberty blockers and hormones for minors. A ruling is expected by June 2025. Those are just some of today's top headlines. Check out more stories over at cbnnews.com. And this hearing that happened here, we're going to get that ruling later on, but it was quite mind-numbing to listen to. It's kind of incredible that here we are in 2024 and people are trying to debate. I think at one point, Justice Sotomayor said something like with a hypothetical, as they often do in these arguments, saying something about what if a girl goes in and she wants to take puberty blockers in order to, or take hormones in order to affirm her masculinity. And I'm just sitting here thinking, we're talking about girls trying to affirm their masculinity on the Supreme Court. And I just, you just kind of think, is this clown world? What is going on here? And it just shows how kind of far society's fallen on this issue, that we're taking these arguments seriously. I mean, this is the mutilation of kids. Let's not mince words here. That's what is happening here. And doctors are complicit in this. And that is all that this Tennessee ban is supposed to do, is stop these doctors from mutilating kids, things that they cannot undo. And that should be common sense. But here we are arguing it at the Supreme Court.
Well, yeah, and we should be quote unquote following the science, right? If we're looking at what Europe is doing and other places around the world that are doing a double take at this, they have research showing that it's not actually helping. So let's just move every other factor out. It's not helping, allegedly. It's purportedly not lowering, suicide rates. You have all these issues. And then let's factor in that these are underage children who can't get a tattoo on their own, can't do pretty much anything on their own. Even if their parents say this is okay, how do we consider life-altering procedures or medication to be something that is permissible for a parent to put on a child? it's wild to me that this is even a point of conversation.
Yeah, I was listening to some of the Supreme Court hearing yesterday, and just to think that, like you were saying, Billy, that this is a conversation that needs to go to the highest court in the land, that we need to debate this, that it is a back and forth. And I understand that there are nuances when it comes to treating somebody who's dealing with gender dysphoria and, counseling them and being compassionate, especially as Christians, and understanding where somebody's coming from and wanting to meet them and ultimately bring them to a place of restoration, right? And restoration and understanding how they should identify as an image bearer of God. So I'm all for all of that compassion, but this godless compassion, which is really no compassion at all, that we're debating in the public arena, is more than anything, I think it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And it's incredible to me that, as you were saying, Trey, I mean, like, our true identity is in Christ. Our true identity is as children of God, and we were made male and female. And that is so self-evident. And anyone who doesn't line up with that, like you said, they're struggling with something internally, but we cannot start making laws that kind of are centered around somebody that has a dysfunctional situation going on inside their head where they don't correspond with the reality that's there. What society is doing right now is just choosing to deny the reality, and then let's try to make laws that go along with somebody's mental condition. And that's just the absolute wrong way to do things. But we keep going further and further down this rabbit hole, and it sounds more and more ridiculous when we're hearing things like this being argued at the Supreme Court. And so let's just pray for some sanity to prevail here in the coming weeks and months as they deliberate on that issue and many more. All right, we're going to head over to the focus story now. And ex-Muslims in Iraq face some really intense persecution. I mean, it really doesn't get much bigger than that. I mean, we know how in Islam they treat apostasy, and it's not good. So what is the latest there in Iraq?
Yeah, well, we spoke with Jeff King. He's the president of International Christian Concern, and he joined the Newsmakers podcast to kind of take us through some of these issues. But, the key question was, what happens if you convert? If you're a Muslim in Iraq, and we know Iraq has gone through quite a bit over the last couple of decades in particular, but what happens? And he said, it really depends on the level of fundamentalism. And he basically said that there's a broad gauge, but that if you're coming from a very fundamentalist family, it can be very typical that you are kidnapped or beaten. And at its lowest level, that would really be what would happen. But it could go all the way up to torture, weeks of torture, even murder, potentially for a conversion. And he said, and it's typically done, this is so hard for Westerners to understand, but it's typically done by the family. So you're really going to come under fire of your own family members many times who are Muslims and are outraged that you have left for Christianity.
What does Open Doors tell us about the level of violence going on against Christians right now?
Yeah, the one thing that we love about Open Doors, their World Watch list, it ranks the most dangerous countries in the world for Christians and for persecution. And they have Iraq at number 16. So pretty high up on the list. It's the 16th most dangerous country in the world for Christians. And I'll read you a little bit about their report. And they're about, by the way, to release their 2025 report in January. So we'll have some updated numbers here, but this is the 2024 report. And they said anyone who converts from Islam will likely face intense pressure from their families and communities. They can be threatened, abused, lose family members, pressured, or even killed. Conversion can have practical consequences as well, including loss of inheritance and lack of opportunity. So to underscore what Jeff King was saying, their report backs it up. If you become a Christian, you are going to face intense persecution. And the most heartbreaking part, yes, it comes from the community. Yes, it comes from other people, but that your own family members could be the ones that turn on you. I mean, that's unbelievable to me.
Yeah, it really is. And, we mentioned International Christian Concern. What have they been doing to help this in other situations as well?
They've been in Iraq for a long time. If you go back years ago when the Islamic State was attacking the country, right? And this is, after the US sort of went in and we had war there and there was chaos there. So Iraq has been in chaos, but they were there when the Islamic State came in. And he said that the terror brought by ISIS was deeply harmful. ISIS went into Christian areas and they emptied them out. They destroyed towns, they destroyed wells. They wanted to end Christianity, he said, that had been in Iraq for 1,000 years, really even longer than that since the beginning. And he said the International Christian Concern has been trying to help rebuild those Christian areas, rebuild businesses, creating wells, all those things that were destroyed, providing other forms of assistance. But he said persecution obviously persists. It continues. He said the victimization keeps going on and all that legacy of damage is awaiting repair. So not only is there persecution, but you have that horrific ISIS-inspired violence and chaos that they're still trying to recover from. So it's not a great situation for Christians there. And as we mentioned, recently, we talked with Jeff King about this bill that's making its way through Iraq's parliament that would allegedly legalize child rape. It would lower the age of consent for young girls in the country from 18 to 9, and which is just unimaginable. So these are things that are happening in that country. We don't often see it in the headlines anymore, but it's pretty horrific.
Yeah, and look, I was in Iraq after ISIS went through there, like about a year or so after, and I saw one of those Christian towns called Telescope when I was there, and I think people are maybe slowly returning there, but it was abandoned when I was there, and it was crazy to see this. And I don't know if you remember some of the propaganda videos that ISIS put up, and they were like tearing down the crosses, kind of like what you're saying, like going after these Christian communities, and then just utter destruction. And that's what it was. You'd see like cross statues and Jesus on the cross, and they'd be all smashed up, and they had put back up the one cross on top of a domed building there, and which was pretty incredible to see as it was still abandoned. I mean, pretty big little city there, and it's no one was in it. And that's what they're trying to recover from and what you're talking about. And obviously that was the extreme level of it, but there's still that hostility underneath. And it's just so difficult to deal with, and we need to be praying. And again, the thing that left me there is when we asked them, like, hey, if Americans see this video, what would you tell them? How can they help? And they said prayer was the number one thing. That's what the Christians there were saying. And so it just goes to show you that they believe in the power of prayer. So we should definitely be praying for them.
Yeah, stories like this are always challenging to me because they make me wonder, would I be that faithful to the Lord if I was in a place where I know that I'm going to face certain persecution and possibly martyrdom for what I believe. And I know too that God gives us the faith that we need for the moment that we need it. I think God is faithful to provide those things in the seasons we need them. So I'm confident that God would give me what I needed for that season. But it's just hard as a Westerner because of the blessing of the land we live in. It's hard to even fathom that reality.
Yeah, really is. And certainly, Billy, appreciate you bringing that. We are definitely going to be praying for the Christians and really anyone that's oppressed by this sort of horrific violence, particularly at the hand of these radical Islamists and Muslims that we see sometimes running roughshod around that region. And so appreciate you putting that on our radar today. All right, we are going to head over to the main thing now. And voters in 7 out of 10 abortion-related initiatives didn't go the way that pro-lifers wanted it to. And this includes places like Missouri, where Amendment 3 passed. So what is next in the fight for life? Well, CBN's Paul Petit took a look at that for today's main thing.
In 2022, Missouri's trigger law made it the first in the country to ban abortion after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. But after November's vote, abortion is once again the law of the land.
Unfortunately, the babies were going to start dying in Missouri again.
Passed by a narrow margin of 51%, Amendment 3 enshrines abortion in the state constitution and allows the procedure to be performed up to birth.
Amendment 3 is more extreme than Illinois, California, New York. It would be the most extreme abortion law on the books in the entire nation.
Less than 24 hours after the votes were counted, Planned Parenthood at the ACLU filed a lawsuit asking the court to declare multiple pro-life laws unconstitutional.
They're going after some health department oversight on the abortion industry. They're wanting to remove restrictions on race and sex selective abortions in Missouri. So they want the ability to kill children simply because they are black or female.
Amendment 3 also opens Missouri to women seeking abortions from neighboring states like Arkansas and Oklahoma, where the procedure is banned.
Things like this that happen in one state don't just impact that state. This is something that for so many surrounding states, especially given some of the central locality, it's now something that many other people come to that state.
Pro-life groups here are now turning to the Republican-controlled state legislature, where the new amendment is expected to be the main issue when the assembly convenes in January. State Representative Justin Sparks is ready to lead the charge.
I'm doing this because I'm convicted that I must do this. I believe that I prayed about this, I considered it prayerfully, and I believe that I'm called to do this.
Sparks plans to challenge presumed House Speaker and fellow Republican John Patterson, who declared before the vote that lawmakers should respect the people's choice. Sparks believes the people were duped.
The voting public only sees 50 words on the ballot. And after people voted, interviews showed overwhelmingly that most people thought that Amendment 3 was about things like contraception and contraceptives and in vitro fertilization and ectopic pregnancies. And most had no idea that what we were actually talking about was unrestricted taxpayer-funded abortion.
If elected Speaker in this uphill battle, Sparks wants to tackle Amendment 3 by helping get specific legislation restricting abortion on the ballot in 2 years.
So we would identify what legislation, how we were going to tackle Amendment 3, what we can actually do to completely deconstruct Amendment 3 from our Constitution and replace it with a great framework, a guiding framework that would in fact outlaw abortion in the state of Missouri again.
The abortion ban across America's heartland has also been impacting Planned Parenthood. According to the St. Louis Business Journal, this Joplin, Missouri clinic was set to close January 1st, along with 2 more facilities in St. Louis. But now that Amendment 3 is passed, all that could change.
They would invest in those clinics because not only would Amendment 3 provide abortions to start back up again, physical abortions back up in Missouri again, but without any restriction. So any injury or death that occurs from an abortion, that provider is now free from liability. And when you talk about removing liability, a place like Planned Parenthood sees huge dollar signs because now they will no longer be under the threat or possibility of being sued for malpractice.
The new amendment still faces a legal fight as a number of state lawmakers and elected officials are looking for ways to overturn it.
Amendment 3 is going to be in the courts. It is being challenged, and all of the current statutes that we have in place are apparently in conflict with this new constitutional amendment. And the constitutional amendment, Amendment 3, is so broad and vague, nobody knows what statutes are actually effective.
Regardless of what happens in the legislature, Jacobs believes the ultimate strategy to stopping abortion is creating a cultural shift, which he says starts with the church.
What we saw was more churches than I expected raising their voice against Amendment 3 from the pulpit, but we also saw a lot of churches that kept silent too.
One of the things I think was also reflective is some of the polling that we've seen is how many Christians support abortion without restriction. And I think it's really more of an indictment on the church.
I believe that, what we do here on earth has echoes in eternity. I truly believe it. And if we don't stand for those that cannot stand for themselves, if we don't speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, God will not hold us blameless.
In Missouri, Paul Petit, CBN News.
All right, Paul, appreciate that report. And that's going to leave us with time on this Friday Junior edition of the Quick Start podcast for one last thing.
We've got Psalm 31:24, be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord. Whether you're being persecuted, no matter what you're facing, the good, the bad, the ugly, we can stay strong and have our faith be rooted in the Lord.
Yeah, I think the end of that verse is especially difficult for me, at least at times. The wait on the Lord part is very hard, but a good reminder nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, we often put ourselves at the center of things. So when we don't get an answer right away, we're like, what is going on? But sometimes, a lot of the time, most of the time, probably all the time, God's timing is better than ours, obviously. So good spot to leave it on this edition of the Quick Start Podcast. As always, get on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Lord willing, that creek don't rise. We'll be back tomorrow with more. God bless. See you then.